Okay, welcome to your video over equations involving absolute value. And what we're going to start, I'm going to do 3 examples, and we're going to start off by remembering what absolute value really means. Absolute value is just a distance from 0 on the number line. Here's what I mean. Let's just say we have the absolute value of x is 3. Well, that just means this, that my x could actually be the value of x, right, could be actually 3. So we could have that value, x is 3. But the value of x could also be negative 3, right here. That's just because there are 2 directions away from 0 on the number line. So when you think about absolute value, just think of 2 directions. When we have 2 directions, we're going to have 2 cases. So we'll be seeing that over and over again. The absolute value, when we're solving an absolute value equation, we're going to have 2 cases. Oops, here we go. Let's start with this example that looks like this. All right, and the directions you'll see in the books and things will say just to solve. So we're going to solve this absolute value equation. Now, the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look around the absolute value. Okay, look around it on either side and make sure that there's nothing else happening to the absolute value. Brackets, meaning there's nothing multiplied, there's nothing added, nothing. In other words, the absolute value is isolated. So we're going to isolate the absolute value. Whatever's inside the absolute value, we're going to isolate it, meaning there's nothing here. So there's nothing here and nothing here. Now, if there is something there, we have to use the properties of equality to get rid of it. So here we go. Let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to have 2 cases. We're going to have case 1. Remember, because there's 2 sides, 2 directions we can go on a number line. And we're going to have case 2. Now, the first case, we always write the equation just like we see it. Once we've isolated, we write the equation just like we see it without the absolute value marks. Now, the second case, we're going to write the left side that's inside the absolute value without the absolute value. We're going to write it as is. We're going to let it equal to the opposite version, meaning a negative 8, the opposite of whatever we see. Okay? So, now we are ready to solve the 2 equations. Well, let's see what we get. We get x is equal to 11 in one case. We have or plus 3. Now, by the way, unless it's equal to 0, these are never going to be the same. X is equal to negative 5. Okay, so we have 2 solutions. X is 11 and x is negative 5. Let's just make sure that they work. If I put an 11 in here, 11 minus 3, there's 8. Absolute value of 8 is 8. Works. How about if we put a negative 5 in there? A negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8, but the absolute value of negative 8 is actually 8. Okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead to the example 2. So this time we're not going to have the absolute value isolated yet. We're going to have to do that on our own. Let's take a look at doing that. All right, so excuse me. We talked about the first step always being to isolate the absolute value, and we see that looking around this, it's not isolated. So what we're going to do first is act like this is just one big fat x. And if this were just 2x minus 5, what would we do first? We would get rid of the plus 5. Excuse me, we'd get rid of the minus 5 by adding 5. So I'm going to act like that absolute value is just a big old fat x, and I'm going to do what I would do normally to get the x alone. So I'm going to isolate the absolute value in the same way. So that's equal to 5. And so now I have the 2. And we have x plus, 7. All right, so now what would I do if this were, again, just 2x? If this were a big old fat x here equals 5, I would divide by 2, correct? So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to divide by 2. And this is me isolating my absolute value. Isolate the absolute value. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just make this a decimal. 5/2 is just 2.5. Okay, now we've isolated the absolute value. That's the very first thing, right, that we had to do. We've done that. Now, where in the world are the two cases? When does that come up? Now that comes up, because once we've isolated the absolute value, we have a case 1. We also have a case 2. Why? Because there are two directions from 0 on a number line. So let's go ahead. First time we write it, we change nothing. We just drop the absolute values. We change nothing. Second time we write it, we change nothing on the left, but we set it equal to the opposite on the right. The opposite. And we just solve. -7 minus 7. We get x is equal to, what do we get for that? We get x is equal to -4.5, or, let's see what we get here. We have x is equal to -9.5. Now, let's go back and make sure that that really does work. If I put -4.5 back into here, what is that going to give me? Excuse me. Is that a... so it's 2.5, and then we have absolute value of 2.5 is 2.5. What's 2 times 2.5 is 5. What's 5 minus 5? 0. Looks like it works okay. Now if I put a -9.5 in there, that's going to give me a -2.5 in the absolute value mark. So absolute value of -2.5 is 2.5. So 2 times 2.5 is 5. 5 minus 5. Okay, so we have those two answers. And one last example. And it's right here. All right. You might be looking at that going, okay, the absolute value is isolated. Let's write our two cases. And we could do that, but we also need to take a look very carefully. Do you notice this says absolute value of that thing is equal to -6? Is that possible? The absolute value of something is negative? No. So this is actually not possible. Now, if you don't notice that before you start working the problem, it's fine. You'll end up with no solution. So this is actually no solution. Nothing is going to work for x to make that true. No solution. Okay? We could call it null set, whatever. No solution. Now, let's just say that you didn't notice that. Let's just say, okay, we're going to do our two cases. So we have x minus 2 is equal to -6, or x minus 2 is equal to +6. Okay, so we go +2, +2. We have x is equal to -4, or +2, +2. X is equal to 8. So we put this back in. This is going to be a -4. -4 minus 2 is -6. Absolute value -6, though, is +6. Guess what? Doesn't work. Put 8 back in there. 8 minus 2 is 6. Absolute value of 6 is 6. Guess what? That's not equal to -6. So, again, no solution. All right, thanks for watching.